The male lead had a face identical to mine. Completely the same, as if we were reflections of each other. But I was the heir to the wealthiest family. He was merely a D-list celebrity struggling to make a name. To prove that he was no less than me, he set his sights on my fiancée, planning to stir up trouble at my wedding in secret. But before he could even begin, I was the first to announce the cancellation of the engagement. The words "wedding cancelled" fell like a thunderclap. The entire hall erupted instantly. What's going on? Weren't they childhood sweethearts? Wasn't their love supposed to be deep and unbreakable? The Bai family must have played themselves this time. Amidst the murmurs and laughter, Bai Ningbing stepped onto the stage, his face dark as night. He grasped my hand tightly and hissed through clenched teeth. "Lin Bei, do you even know what occasion this is today? Are you out of your mind?" Bai Ningbing's icy voice echoed through the microphone, making the guests gape in astonishment. This lady really thinks she can boss young Master Lin around. With that attitude, no wonder he's breaking off the engagement. What kind of spoiled arrogance is that? Even a prince wouldn't tolerate such treatment. And she's speaking to the heir of the wealthiest family like that? She must think she's ordering around a servant. Meanwhile, old Master Lin's face darkened visibly. If this was how she treated his grandson in public, then what kind of attitude did she have in private? The thought alone made his expression even grimmer. The truth was, Bai Ningbing never wanted to marry me. She was only yielding to her grandfather's pressure. But when I said the words, "I want to break off the engagement," her first reaction was to refuse. Quickly, she convinced herself. It wasn't because she couldn't bear to part with me. Her heart had always belonged to Liu Wei. She simply couldn't accept it. After all, she had schemed and plotted for years. And I could just end it all with one sentence? Today was supposed to be the grand union of the Lin and Bai families. A wedding celebration, but the groom had called it off. One could only imagine, after today, she would become the laughingstock of the entire northern city. A fierce glint flashed through Bai Ningbing's eyes. No, this wedding must not be called off. Perhaps she had grown too accustomed to ordering me around. Even now, despite the overwhelming circumstances, when she spoke, it was still in that commanding tone. "Lin Bei, can you stop being so reckless and childish? Today is the union of our two families. If you have any issues, we can discuss them after the ceremony." This time, before I could respond, old Master Lin spoke first. "There is no need for this wedding to continue," old Master Lin declared. After speaking, he patted my back in reassurance. Then, turning to Bai Ningbing once more, his gaze turned icy and sharp. For a moment, Bai Ningbing was intimidated by his presence, but then he reconsidered. He wasn't the one who had suddenly called off the wedding. By all logic, he should be the victim here. Straightening his posture, he shed his previous vulnerability, positioning himself on the moral high ground. He spoke to old Master Lin as if they were equals. "Grandfather Lin, Lin Bei is acting out, insisting on breaking off the engagement on such an important occasion as today. Surely you can't just let him be willful, can you?" His words carried a clear implication that old Master Lin should rein in his grandson. Old Master Lin glanced at him, his aged eyes holding a trace of frost. Then, in a tone of absolute authority, he declared, "My grandson, Lin Fan, has the right to be willful. He may do as he pleases." The entire banquet hall fell into absolute silence. The old man hadn't even lifted a finger. Yet everyone could practically hear the sound of an invisible slap landing across Bai Ningbing's face. Having been pampered and unchallenged his entire life, Bai Ningbing had never been humiliated so openly before. Unable to contain himself, he blurted out, "Are you planning to sever ties with the Bai family?" The moment his words fell, a loud slap actually echoed through the hall. His face was struck so hard it turned to the side. The one who delivered the slap was none other than his own grandfather, old Master Bai. Bai Ningbing turned his head back slowly, his eyes filled with disbelief. "Grandfather," he choked out, but old Master Bai roared at him. "You still have the nerve to call me that? Is this how you speak to Grandfather Lin? Apologize immediately." Tears gushed from Bai Ningbing's eyes like a broken dam. Without another word, he turned and fled the wedding venue. The sudden twist in events left the entire crowd dumbfounded. Old Master Bai's face darkened further. The banquet hall was now a chaotic mess. I slowly stepped forward, gripping the microphone as I spoke in a deep, steady voice. I sincerely apologize. I invited you all here today, but this wedding will not take place. As of this moment, Bai Ningbing and I are no longer engaged. From now on, our lives as man and woman will never intertwine again. After the wedding was officially over, I removed my suit and sat in the living room. Old Master Lin observed me carefully. Only then did Old Master Lin finally relax a little. Zibei, he asked, why did you suddenly decide to break off the engagement with that girl from the Bai family? My expression remained calm, a cold smirk curling at the corner of my lips. Because I discovered that Bai Ningbing was cheating. Right before the wedding began, she was on the phone with that man, saying that marrying me was merely a strategic move, all to seize control of the Lin family's wealth. Once she gained your trust, grandfather, the Bai family would launch their final strike and swallow the Lin family whole. And when that time came, she would kick me aside without hesitation and marry that man instead. Old Master Lin's face darkened instantly, his fury exploding like a storm. What? That girl from the Bai family really said that? I nodded. Every single word is true. Even though his rage was boiling over, Old Master Lin still softened his expression when he turned back to me. Zibei, don't worry. Leave this matter to grandfather. I will make sure the Bai family gives us an explanation. But I knew that wouldn't be enough. Grandfather's approach would only treat the symptoms, not the root of the problem. I met Old Master Lin's gaze with unwavering determination. I want to be the CEO of Lin Entertainment. Without hesitation, Old Master Lin agreed. Lin Entertainment, one of the many subsidiaries under the Lin Group, a dominant force in the entertainment industry. Most importantly, the male lead, Liu Wei, was signed under Lin Entertainment. Because Bai Ningbing had been my fiancée, she had some influence within Lin Entertainment as well. At her command, she had secretly pressured one of the executives, and from that moment on, Liu Wei's career had soared without obstacles. Lin Entertainment was located in a skyscraper in South City's CBD. The moment Liu Wei stepped inside, he ran into his current manager, Fang Ling. Sister Ling, good morning. Where are you off to? Compared to Liu Wei's playful grin, Fang Ling's expression was grave. She responded bluntly. A new CEO has just been appointed at Lin Entertainment's headquarters. There might be a major shakeup within the company. I'm heading to the 33rd floor for a meeting now. Hearing this, Liu Wei nodded obediently. Then go ahead, Sister Ling. Fang Ling glanced at her watch before adding, by the way, there are a few great scripts I left in your lounge. Make sure to take a look when you have time. As she spoke, a knowing smile curved her lips. This time, you got the male lead role. You're about to step into the ranks of the listers. At that moment, inside the conference room on the 33rd floor of Lin Corporation's headquarters, the senior executives from various departments and managers had already taken their seats. A low murmur of discussion filled the room as they speculated about the new CEO, who had been parachuted in by Lin Group's headquarters. With a new ruler comes new ministers. Everyone was concerned about their future. At precisely 10 a.m., the doors of the conference room swung open from the outside. All heads turned toward the entrance. A tall and strikingly handsome man stepped inside, dressed in a custom-made suit. His leather shoes clicked against the floor with measured confidence. Two sharp, elite-looking assistants following closely behind. His presence alone commanded attention. The executives exchanged glances. The newly appointed CEO was surprisingly young, and so many of them couldn't help but harbor a sense of disdain. I took in every flicker of their expressions before breaking the silence. Good morning, everyone. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Lin Bei. The moment they heard my name, all traces of contempt vanished from their faces. If I had merely been an external hire, these wily old foxes might not have been so quick to submit. But now, things were different. I was the sole heir of the wealthiest family in the capital. The entire Lin Group belonged to my family. Who would dare show disrespect? Almost immediately, voices rang out in unison. Greetings, young Master Lin. I let out a cold chuckle. In this company, I expect you to call me President Lin, not young Master. Understood, President Lin. They chorused in unison, taking over Lin Entertainment. The status of an elite heir certainly had its perks. I plan to establish my authority first, before seamlessly taking over the entire Lin group, and dealing with Liu Wei along the way. Well, that was just a bonus. I casually swiveled my chair. Then I called out a name. Fang Ling. Hearing her name, Fang Ling's heart skipped a beat. Something about this didn't feel right. President Lin, how may I assist you? She asked cautiously. While Fang Ling was visibly tense, I remained lazily reclined in my seat. If I remember correctly, I mused. You're managing an artist named Liu Wei, aren't you? Fang Ling stiffened. She had no idea why I was bringing up Liu Wei all of a sudden, and since she wasn't sure whether I favored or despised him, she could only respond as neutrally as possible. Yes, President Lin, I do indeed manage an artist by that name. I see, I nodded slowly, drawing out my words. I deliberately drew out my words. Speaking of which, this little artist does bear a striking resemblance to me. My expression turned cold in an instant, my handsome features hardening. My sharp gaze pinned Fang Ling in place like a blade. Liu Wei, I said, voice devoid of warmth. I don't like him. Not one bit. You should know what to do. Right. Fang Ling's smile froze on her face. One was an up-and-coming small-time celebrity, the heir to the Lin family fortune. Weighing the odds, the choice was obvious. President Lin, I understand what needs to be done. I waved a hand dismissively, the corners of my lips curling slightly. Smart woman. Meanwhile, on the 17th floor of Lin Corporation, Liu Wei was carefully flipping through several scripts. The resources Fang Ling had provided him were promising. As he fantasized about his impending rise to a list stardom, Fang Ling suddenly pushed the door open. Liu Wei jumped up from the couch, still holding a script, a bright smile on his face. Sister Ling, you're back. How was the meeting? Oh, by the way, I read through those scripts carefully. That mystery drama is quite good. Fang Ling's expression remained as neutral as always, but her words carried an entirely different weight. That script isn't for you. Liu Wei's smile stiffened, a flash of disappointment crossing his eyes. But he quickly recovered. Oh, I see, just a mistake then. Well, the martial arts drama is pretty solid too. This time, he didn't even get to finish his sentence. Fang Ling cut him off. That script isn't for you either. Liu Wei's expression froze completely. His eyes widened in disbelief. Even with his normally good temperament, he couldn't help but feel his temper flare. Fang Ling had personally given him these scripts. She had told him he could choose whichever role he liked. Yet now, after he had gone through them all, she was saying none of them were meant for him? Was she toying with him? Liu Wei reminded himself Fang Ling was his manager. She controlled his future in the industry. So he forced himself to swallow his anger. With great effort, he managed a strained smile. Sister Ling, you must be joking with me, right? Fang Ling, hearing the hint of resentment in his voice, smirked coldly in her heart. How dare he blame me? He must have offended young Master Lin somehow. Yet he didn't even have the decency to warn me about it. Thanks to him, I was completely blindsided at the executive meeting today, humiliated in front of everyone. At that thought, Fang Ling lost all remaining patience for Liu Wei. With a cold voice, I said, "Who's joking with you? Starting today, all of your resources will be revoked. They will be transferred to Shai Hao. This is a decision, not a negotiation." Shai Hao was a newly signed artist under Fang Ling. His looks and demeanor bore a resemblance to Liu Wei. Previously, Shai Hao could only pick up the scraps, the leftover resources that Liu Wei didn't care for, or the roles that Liu Wei had already declined. Liu Wei never said it aloud, but he had always looked down on Shai Hao. And now, Fang Ling was taking all the resources that had once belonged to him and handing them over to Shai Hao instead. Of course, Liu Wei couldn't accept this. His voice trembled in disbelief. What the hell? Why are all my resources going to Shy Hao? Sister Ling, why are you doing this? Think carefully, who have you offended recently? Fang Ling left him with just those few cryptic words. Liu Wei was completely lost. Offended someone? But who? Even if he had accidentally crossed someone, would it really warrant such a drastic reaction? Then suddenly a thought struck him. His face paled. Could it be him? The first person Liu Wei thought of turning to for help was Bai Ningbing. Seeing the frustration written all over Liu Wei's face, Bai Ningbing casually asked about it, and Liu Wei poured out his grievances. Sister Ling said I offended some big shot, and that orders came from above to blacklist me. But you know me. I've always maintained good relationships with everyone. How could I have offended anyone? Bai Ningbing immediately responded, you've always been an upstanding person. There's no way you could have offended anyone. It must be Lin Bei's doing. Bai Ningbing paused, recalling how I had humiliated him by calling off the engagement at the wedding. His anger flared again. Don't worry about this. I will make Lin Bei give you an explanation. With Bai Ningbing's assurance, Liu Wei instantly felt relieved. He smiled, his eyes brimming with affection, and pulled Bai Ningbing into an embrace. Bai Ningbing's face turned slightly red, and he called for the waiter to settle the bill. He confidently tossed out a black card. But after a moment, the waiter returned. Apologies, miss, the waiter said politely. Your card has been frozen. Would you like to use another form of payment? Hearing that her card was frozen, Bai Ningbing's face darkened, but he quickly figured out the reason. It must be Old Master Bai's doing. Because he had run away from the wedding, Old Master Bai had retaliated by cutting him off financially. For the first time in her life, Bai Ningbing experienced true humiliation. And worst of all, it happened right in front of the man she loved. In the end, it was Liu Wei, ever so understanding, who took out his own card and settled the bill. The two of them returned to their apartment. Bai Ningbing immediately called her grandfather. The moment the call connected, she demanded, Grandfather, why did you freeze my cards? Old Master Bai let out a cold chuckle. After waiting for days, she finally called, and the first thing she did was demand an explanation. What a wonderful granddaughter indeed. Very well, why I cut off your finances. His voice was as cold as ice. Bai Ningbing's expression stiffened. Her grip on the phone tightened slightly. Grandfather, I've told you before I never liked Lin Bei. It was you who forced me to marry him. Old Master Bai let out a short, angry laugh. When he had first arranged the engagement with the Lin family, Bai Ningbing had never refused. In fact, she had secretly enjoyed the process of me pursuing her. After all, marrying into the Lin family was the dream of countless women. It was her greatest bragging right in high society. But then Liu Wei appeared, and it was as if she had been possessed. She abandoned her prestigious status to fall in love with a mere actor. The thought made Old Master Bai's anger flare. Don't forget who you are, he warned. Without the Bai family, you are nothing. I'll give you 3 days to think this through. Either you return and apologize to Lin Bei, beg for his forgiveness, or you will no longer be part of this family. All of your assets will be taken back. Financial punishment. But Bai Ningbing had always been the preferred weapon of a family patriarch, had never truly faced the cruelty of the real world. In a voice even colder than Old Master Bai's, she spat out 2 words. Suit yourself. Then she hung up. Old Master Bai's lips trembled with fury. Enraged, he immediately ordered all of Bai Ningbing's assets to be confiscated. Overnight, the once revered daughter of high society became a disgraced runaway, stripped of her wealth, left to fend for herself. From behind, Liu Wei wrapped his arms around her. He whispered, Ningbing, I heard everything you and your grandfather said. You gave up everything for me. From now on, let me take care of you. All right? Bai Ningbing was still fuming with anger. At least someone in this world still understood her. I really didn't fall in love with the wrong person. And so, Bai Ningbing moved into Liu Wei's small apartment. She stayed there, entwined with him, for several days. It wasn't until much later that Liu Wei finally remembered his career. Seeing his frustration, Bai Ningbing made a swift decision. She would accompany him to Lin Entertainment. She would stand behind him, backing him up. The moment they stepped into the Lin Corporation building, a cold, almost icy aura radiated from Bai Ningbing. She fixed Fang Ling with a wintry glare, like a frozen knight swallowing its prey. "So it was you who gave away his resources," she said. "And now you want to bury his career?" Fang Ling was both shocked and furious. Bai Ningbing's face was one frequently seen across major media outlets. As the former fiancée of the wealthiest heir, who wouldn't recognize her? Fang Ling had always suspected that Liu Wei had a benefactor, but she never expected it to be her. Still, she forced herself to remain composed as she responded. "Miss Bai, this was a company decision." At those words, Bai Ningbing's lips curled into a smirk. A cold, mocking laugh escaped her lips. "A company decision? Fine, call President Huang here." President Huang was the CEO of Lin Entertainment. Or rather, he had been. Bai Ningbing clearly had no idea. She assumed that the mere mention of Huang's name would be enough to make Fang Ling panic. But to her surprise, Fang Ling remained unfazed. Without even blinking, she responded, "Apologies, Miss Bai. President Huang has been dismissed." Bai Ningbing frowned. For the first time, she felt something slipping out of her control. "Dismissed," she echoed, her voice stiff. Fang Ling, unfazed, nodded. "That's correct. The current CEO of Lin Entertainment is President Lin." Bai Ningbing hadn't considered that the President Lin Fang Ling spoke of could actually be me. After all, back when I had pursued her, I had never cared about my family's business. The idea of me as CEO was unthinkable to her. But Fang Ling's gaze flickered with something sharp, a glint of vengefulness. She glanced at Liu Wei and Bai Ningbing, who stood so intimately close, their bodies almost entwined. And a thought of retribution took root in her mind. She turned to Bai Ningbing and asked, "Miss Bai, would you like to meet President Lin?" Bai Ningbing smirked. Her icy features exuded arrogance. With an entitled tilt of her chin, she said haughtily, "Of course. Tell this President Lin to come see me immediately." I had already been informed. So when I received Fang Ling's call, I wasn't surprised. Instead, after hearing her words, I chuckled, leaning back lazily in my swivel chair. I spoke in a calm, indifferent tone. "Either Bai Ningbing comes up to the 33rd floor to see me herself, or security can throw out anyone unrelated to the company." Hearing my command, Fang Ling's lips curled slightly. She replied respectfully, "Understood, President Lin." Liu Wei had always been nothing more than a dog relying on his master's power. His arrogance stemmed solely from Bai Ningbing's backing. But in the end, it was the Lin Corporation that paid his salary. What right did Bai Ningbing have to flaunt her status in my territory? Her only leverage had been my former affection for her. When I still liked Bai Ningbing, she was treated as the future lady of the Lin family. Everyone at Lin Corporation had to give her due respect. But now that I no longer cared for her, what did she amount to? Fang Ling relayed my message to Bai Ningbing, a faint hint of mockery tugging at her lips. With a cold smile, she said, "Miss Bai, President Lin says he's busy. He doesn't have time to come down. If you want to see him, you'll have to go up to the 33rd floor yourself." After all, Bai Ningbing was still a young lady of the Bai family. Even if she was no longer the Lin family's future daughter-in-law, she still outranked a mere talent agent like Fang Ling. So, out of courtesy, Fang Ling softened my words somewhat, refraining from repeating them verbatim. Because if Bai Ningbing heard my original phrasing, that she should get up here herself or be thrown out, there was no telling if she explode on the spot. Yet even with this softened version, Bai Ningbing was already livid. She had expected me to immediately come down to meet her, but instead, I was making her go up. The sheer audacity made her laugh in rage. With a sneer, she demanded, "Did you not tell him who I am?" Fang Ling looked at her like she was an idiot. "Miss Bai," she said coolly, "I informed President Lin about your identity from the very start. You must not have been paying attention." Bai Ningbing rarely encountered situations where she was ignored like this. She let out a sharp laugh. "Fine, I'd love to see what kind of deity this President Lin thinks he is." Fuming, she stormed toward the CEO's office and slammed the doors open. Bai Ningbing was instantly stunned. The words she had prepared to question me got stuck in her throat. I lifted my head from the documents in front of me, one perfectly shaped brow arching slightly with cold indifference. You barge in without knocking? Or is this the level of etiquette taught in the Bai family? Though I was sitting in my chair, and they were the ones standing, the oppressive weight of my presence bore down on them. Liu Wei was so shaken by my aura that an unexpected sense of inferiority crept into his heart. He was just a minor celebrity in Lin Entertainment, and I was now the CEO who held absolute control over his future. His face paled, and he stammered nervously, I'm sorry, President Lin. It was only at that moment that Bai Ningbing fully grasped the truth. The man sitting in the CEO's chair was Lin Bei. A wave of dizziness washed over her. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears, steadily accelerating. But then she heard Liu Wei's trembling voice, and instinctively, she chose to defend her little lover, blindly shifting the blame onto me. I lifted my chin slightly, a smirk playing at the corner of my lips. Miss Bai, I drawled. Which eye of yours saw me bullying your little pet? If your eyes are that useless, perhaps you should feed them to the dogs. If Bai Ningbing's first moment of shock today had been seeing my transformation, the fact that I was no longer the polished young heir she once knew, but a man radiating sharp, dangerous authority. A man who could make hearts race. Then her second moment of shock today was hearing those words come from me. The man who once adored her was now telling her to feed her eyes to the dogs. Her face paled. She was both stunned and humiliated. But when she tried to respond, no words came. Her chest tightened in frustration, yet she was completely speechless. Seeing me and Bai Ningbing openly at odds, Liu Wei inexplicably felt a surge of protectiveness toward her. He stepped forward, shielding her with his body. President Lin, he blurted out urgently, how could you treat her? Before he could even finish, I shot him a sidelong glance, a single look, filled with cold, unyielding dominance. And just like that, Liu Wei froze, his voice caught in his throat. Unable to utter another word, satisfied, I withdrew my gaze, leaning back in my chair with an air of lazy amusement. What I say, I murmured. What I do? That single sentence made Liu Wei's face flush red with embarrassment. Seeing this, I continued. You just said I shouldn't treat Bai Ningbing like this. Is that right? Liu Wei swallowed hard, feeling as though my overwhelming presence was suffocating him. But then, remembering that Bai Ningbing was by his side, he reassured himself. I wouldn't dare do anything to him. And besides, he needed to put on a show for Bai Ningbing. As if suddenly finding solid ground beneath him, Liu Wei steadied himself, his gaze now carrying a trace of false determination. Bai Ningbing is the eldest daughter of the Bai family, he declared. How can you humiliate her like this? She deserves respect, not insult. This display of courage made Bai Ningbing's heart flutter. Even though Liu Wei was clearly terrified, he still stood up to protect her. I really didn't love the wrong person, she thought. Meanwhile, I could hardly be bothered to watch this pair of clowns flaunt their delusions in front of me. I let out a low, mocking laugh. My gaze, filled with an icy brilliance, slowly swept over Liu Wei. Then, enunciating each word with deliberate clarity, I said, only you need to flatter and grovel before this woman. But I insult Bai Ningbing whenever I want. And what exactly can she do about it? Saying this, I casually crossed my arms over my chest, leaning back in my chair with lazy arrogance. This, I smirked, is the difference between you and me. Liu Wei's eyes burned with rage, but no matter how furious he was, he couldn't refute my words. I was the heir to the wealthiest family. Even Bai Ningbing wouldn't dare openly provoke me. So what could Liu Wei do? Seeing Liu Wei being cornered because of her, Bai Ningbing couldn't sit still any longer. She stepped in front of him, shielding him with her body. Her voice was cold as she snapped. Lin Bei, you're nothing but a spoiled brat, relying on your family's wealth to act recklessly. If you ever lost your title as the Lin family's heir, what would you even be worth? At least Liu Wei has built himself up through his own hard work. Her words were spoken with force, each syllable ringing with righteous conviction. She spoke as if she were delivering some great truth, as if she were completely crushing me underfoot. But in the corner of her vision, she failed to notice Liu Wei's lips curling ever so slightly. In his eyes, a flicker of triumph gleamed, but what none of them expected was my complete lack of reaction. Faced with Bai Ningbing's outburst, I showed neither anger nor offense. Instead, I simply looked at her with a smirk, a slow amusement glinting in my eyes. Born into wealth and privilege, compared to me, she was the least qualified to say those words. Bai Ningbing was so enraged, she momentarily lost her words, realizing there was no room left for retreat. Liu Wei decided to throw caution to the wind. Word by word, he declared, "President Lin, I may be insignificant, but I still have my pride. If you keep pushing me like this, when I have nothing left to lose, I'd rather burn everything down with me." My expression remained unchanged. Only the faint curve of mockery lifted the corner of my lips. "Are you threatening me?" Liu Wei pressed his lips together. Then, gathering all his courage, he said, "Yes, I know the Lin family is the wealthiest in the capital, but even you can't control everything, right?" As he spoke, Liu Wei locked eyes with me, refusing to back down, as if reminding me that he too had a fanbase, that if I left him no way out, he would drag me down with him. I only let out a cold chuckle. "You're wrong. The Lin family can control everything. Bai Ningbing should know that better than anyone. Even Su Qingsu, when she was at the peak of her fame, all it took was a quiet word to an executive at Lin Entertainment. And now, she's all but erased from the entertainment industry." Even if Bai Ningbing knew this was true, she still couldn't bear to see Liu Wei suffer. Her gaze turned sharp, hostility flashing in her eyes. "Lin Bei, don't go too far," she warned. I didn't even spare her a glance. Instead, I looked straight at Liu Wei and continued, "You think just because you have some fans in the industry, that you can wage a public war against me? You think you can use public opinion to pull me down with you?" Liu Wei said nothing, but his silence was an admission in itself. My eyes remained amused as I lazily reminded him, "Even though I no longer care for Bai Ningbing, you do well to remember something. Before this, she was my fiancé, and you were nothing more than her kept lover. Most people would hide that shame, but you're the first I've seen who rushes to expose himself. Tell me, if your fans found out that the idol they worshipped was nothing but a cheap plaything." Without a second thought, Bai Ningbing turned on me, accusing, "Lin Bei, don't go too far. I have never liked you. I never acknowledged being your fiancé. What right do you have to say these things?" If this had been in the past, hearing those words would have undoubtedly wounded me. And Bai Ningbing still believed that to be true. She thought I'd be hurt. She thought I still cared. Funny, I also had no desire to acknowledge it. But over the years, the Bai family had relied on the Lin family. They had benefited greatly from the connection. Whether she wanted to admit it or not didn't matter, because in the eyes of the world, she had always been a part of the Lin family. So no matter how deeply moved you are by your own theatrics, I smirked. In the eyes of others, Liu Wei is nothing more than your kept lover. Bai Ningbing clenched her jaw tightly. Her fingernails dug deep into the flesh of her palm. Yet, she could not find a single word to refute me. And the angrier she got, the more amused I became. That was one way to look at things. But objectively, I was now the CEO of Lin Entertainment. Liu Wei was merely one of the company's contracted artists. I had reviewed the financial records, and in the past 2 years, the company had poured money and resources into him, enough to cultivate an A-list star. Yet Liu Wei had never reached that level. So I pulled his resources. I said simply, "That's called cutting losses in time." My eyes turned sharp, fixing onto Liu Wei like a blade. "You, better than anyone, know exactly how you got here. So I don't understand. Where do you find the audacity to stand before me and make demands?" Liu Wei's face alternated between red and pale. A flicker of guilt flashed through his eyes, because deep down, He knew I wasn't wrong. Once upon a time, he was nothing, a mere background character in the entertainment industry. It was only after meeting by Ningbing that his career had skyrocketed. A stubborn resentment still smoldered within him, but just as he was about to speak, I cut him off without hesitation. Alright, your questions have been answered. I'm a very busy man. If there's nothing else, then kindly show yourselves out. With that, I pressed the internal line, summoning my secretary. Escort these two out. A moment later, Bai Ningbing and Liu Wei were both ushered out of my office. Liu Wei's eyes were filled with uncertainty and fear. President Lin, he wouldn't let him off so easily. What should I do? His vulnerable, anxious state made Bai Ningbing's heart ache. President Lin holds my contract in his hands, Liu Wei murmured. He's acting out of love turned to hate. I'm afraid that even your influence might not be enough to change his mind. Bai Ningbing paused for a moment, slightly stunned. Love turned to hate? Before today, she had assumed that my transformation was merely an act, a ploy to regain her attention. But after seeing my attitude today, she finally realized I wasn't playing hard to get. I was utterly indifferent to her. Just as she was struggling to decipher my true thoughts, Liu Wei's words suddenly gave her clarity. So he really does hate me because he once loved me? The thought instantly reassured her. Do you still not trust me? She asked gently. The Lin family may be the wealthiest in the capital, but my Bai family is no pushover either. If it comes to it, I'll pay the breach of contract penalty for you. Bai Group has its own entertainment company. If you sign with us, your treatment will be just as good, if not better, than at Lin Entertainment. Besides, Lin Bei is only acting recklessly because of his family's status. But do you really think his grandfather knows about all this? If old Master Lin finds out, he definitely won't let him continue running wild like this. There's always a solution. Zi Wei. Trust me. The nickname Zi Wei made Liu Wei uncomfortable, but he held back his thoughts. Instead, his eyes gleamed with just the right amount of surprise, just enough to appear touched. Really? He asked, voice soft with emotion. Thank you. As if to prove her words, Bai Ningbing immediately pulled out her phone and called old Master Lin. Grandfather Lin, she said sweetly. Lin Bei has no understanding of business management. He's been abusing his power at Lin Entertainment, suppressing artists at will based on his mood and personal grudges. He's ruining the careers of promising, hardworking talents. Do you really think this is appropriate? A cold laugh echoed from the other end of the line. I assume by promising artist, you mean Liu Wei? After I had spoken to old Master Lin about it, he had ordered an investigation into Bai Ningbing. Previously, he had tolerated her because of me, because he had once thought I cared about her. But when old Master Lin wanted to uncover something, with his authority and influence, there was hardly anything in the entire capital that could be hidden from him. And sure enough, not only had he uncovered Liu Wei's true relationship with Bai Ningbing, he had also dug up other secrets about Liu Wei. In old Master Lin's wise yet weathered eyes, a cold, razor-sharp glint flashed through old Master Lin's eyes. His voice dropped to a low, authoritative tone. My grandson is not someone for you to lecture. There was no yelling, no hysterical outburst. Yet his words carried the weight of absolute dominance. Bai Ningbing was so stunned she couldn't respond immediately. After a long pause, all she could say was, Grandfather Lin, I don't have any selfish intentions. I was only reminding you because I was worried. Worried that Lin Bei might ruin Lin Entertainment. After all, it is a profitable industry for the Lin family. I was just thinking about the family's best interests. Old Master Lin let out a soft, mocking laugh. There's no need. As long as Zi Bei is happy, even if he plays with Lin Entertainment as a practice ground, I can afford it. Old Master Lin was not the type to swallow his pride. He had always held me in the highest regard. Bai Ningbing had already crossed the line by cheating. Now, to make matters worse, she was complaining to him on behalf of her little lover. That was the final straw. Before she could even respond, click! Old Master Lin hung up on her without another word. And then, without hesitation, he dialed another number. This time, to old Master Bai. The moment the call connected, his voice thundered. Bai, control your granddaughter. She dares to stand up for her little plaything, and even dares to criticize my grandson. Let me warn you, my patience has limits. Old Master Bai was blasted with an earful of insults. His face turned dark with frustration, but the worst part was that old Master Lin's rage was fully justified. There was no way for him to argue back. At that moment, on the other end of the call, old Master Bai could only endure the verbal lashing in silence. Being berated like a schoolboy, he felt both humiliated and furious. But once the call ended, his gaze darkened, as if he had made a firm decision. Immediately after, he issued an order to the entire Bai group. Bai Ningbing is to be stripped of all positions within Bai group. From this day forward, she is forbidden from acting on behalf of the Bai family. Previously, old Master Bai had merely suspended her position. He had only wanted her to apologize and yield. But this time, it was different. This time, he meant it. And to make sure the world knew, he made an official announcement to pull him out of Lin Entertainment. Little did she know, old Master Bai had been watching her every move, and he had already made his decision to train a new heir. Bai Ningbing had officially become worthless to the Bai family. All those people who once flattered her now refused to even acknowledge her. All the promises she had made to Liu Wei, they turned to empty words. And to make matters worse, the apartment Liu Wei had been living in was company property, a residence provided to Lin Entertainment artists. Naturally, I reclaimed it at the right moment. Liu Wei, now penniless, and Bai Ningbing, equally destitute, had no choice but to move out overnight. Even the car Liu Wei had been given for company use was taken back as well. One step at a time, I was burying them alive. Meanwhile, Bai Ningbing received a call from home. On the other end, her mother's voice was frantic. Hurry back, right now. Your grandfather. He brought your father's illegitimate son home. Bai Ningbing's father had been infamous in his youth, a notorious playboy, an entitled, reckless heir who left bastards all over the place. If not for the childhood engagement between Bai Ningbing and me, if not for the Lin family connection that solidified her status, even her parents wouldn't have been able to secure their place in the family. Old Master Bai had once made it clear, no illegitimate children were ever to set foot in the Bai estate. But now, he had personally brought one back home. Her parents, terrified of losing their position, had immediately called her, desperate to warn her. Bai Ningbing felt a chill run through her. Grandfather brought an illegitimate son home? She already knew the answer. There was only one explanation. Old Master Bai was done with her. She couldn't let this happen. A crushing fear clawed at her chest. Her ability to defy old Master Bai had only ever existed because she had been the sole heir. But now, that title was no longer hers. Bai Ningbing couldn't afford to lose everything. She turned and looked around at the tiny, shabby 10-square-meter apartment she had rented after being forced out. Compared to the luxury villa she had once lived in, it was like the difference between heaven and hell. And as for Liu Wei, he was no longer the considerate, devoted man she remembered. Day after day, he did nothing but complain. Bai Ningbing suddenly felt lost. Is this really the life I wanted? Feng Bai, the eldest young master of the Feng family, had always been a devoted fan of Su Qingsu. Back when she was a top-tier celebrity, he had sent her flowers at concerts, lavished her with extravagant, sky-high gifts, all in hopes of catching just one fleeting glance from her. But at that time, she had been an untouchable star, distant, dazzling, and far beyond his reach. Now, that same star had dimmed, fallen from grace into this place where darkness and revelry coexisted. And suddenly, she seemed within his grasp. Feng Bai didn't care about the scandals surrounding her, the dirt that had been exposed online. He had tracked her down offline, to this bar where she worked as a resident singer. As a former queen of the entertainment industry, Su was still well-liked here. The bar's management paid her a decent salary, but she had a terminally ill mother in the hospital. She didn't perform every night. Even so, Feng Bai often loitered in the bar, waiting for her. Everyone in his circle knew. The esteemed young master Feng had taken a liking to a singer in a bar. But Su Qingsu's attitude toward him remained unchanged, neither submissive nor ingratiating. She treated him as nothing more than an ordinary customer. That night, I walked into the bar dressed in black. I casually took a seat in a booth, my gaze falling onto the girl on stage. Holding the microphone, her figure was elegant yet distant. Lost in thought, I watched her. In my past life, when Bai Ningbing had ruined me, driven me to bankruptcy, it was this woman who had taken me in. It was only then that I discovered this once glorious superstar had been my unremarkable deskmate in high school. She had silently loved me for 10 years. Yet because of one sentence from Bai Ningbing, I had stood by as this once radiant woman was cast down into this miserable state. Su Qingsu only performed once a week, every Friday night, and the moment her set ended, Feng Bai's men escorted her to his table. The offer I made last time, to be my girlfriend, have you thought it over? Feng Bai's advances were nothing new. He had confessed to her more than once. But Su Qingsu's answer had always been the same, a firm no. But Feng Bai was a wealthy heir, rejected time and time again. Feng Bai still believed he liked her, that he was willing to take her in. And that in itself was a gift. So when she refused to accept it, it infuriated him. Last time, he had left her with a warning, telling Su Qingsu to think carefully. His tone had carried a thinly veiled threat. In my past life, it was this very refusal that had sent Feng Bai into a rage. In his fury, he had stormed into Su Qingsu's mother's hospital room and spat cruel, venomous words. Only then did Su's mother finally realize what her daughter had been enduring all this time. Her condition immediately worsened. She collapsed and had to be rushed to emergency care. Though the doctors managed to revive her, she could no longer bear to drag her daughter down. That very night, while no one was watching, she quietly removed her own oxygen mask. By the time Su Qingsu woke up the next morning, her mother's body was already cold. If I had been the one responsible for pushing Su Qingsu into darkness, then Feng Bai had been the final straw that crushed her completely. But now, in this second life, I refused to let Su Qingsu suffer the same fate. That was why I was here tonight. Meanwhile, Su Qingsu stood under the dim bar lights, dressed in a simple, modest white dress. And yet, in the midst of this loud, chaotic place, she carried an ethereal purity, like a lotus blooming in untouched water. Hearing Feng Bai's question, Su Qingsu simply raised an elegant brow. With a polite, composed tone, she said, "Apologies, sir. I am currently focused on earning a living. I have no intention of dating anyone." She had already been as gracious as she could, but Feng Bai was relentless. "I can give you money." Su Qingsu's expression didn't even flicker. She simply replied, voice light but firm, "No, thank you." At last, Feng Bai lost his temper. "Am I not good enough? You reject me over and over. Or is it because you already have someone else?" Su Qingsu had been about to say no, but for some reason, a figure flashed through her mind, and just for a brief second, she hesitated. That single hesitation was all Feng Bai needed. His expression twisted. "Who is it?" Feng Bai could tolerate the idea that Su Qingsu didn't love him yet. Su Qingsu ignored Feng Bai. She turned to leave, but before she could take more than a step, Feng Bai's lackeys blocked her path. "You still think you're the glamorous superstar you used to be? Brother Bai has taken an interest in you. That's a blessing for you. Don't be so ungrateful, or you'll be forced to drink the bitter wine instead. Look at yourself now. Do you really think you still have the right to act high and mighty?" Su Qingsu frowned slightly. She had always been proud, but in her current state, she could no longer afford the luxury of pride. Ignoring their taunts, she turned and continued walking. But before she could take more than 2 steps, a voice rang out from behind her. "Su Qingsu, you have a sick mother, don't you?" At those words, Su Qingsu whipped around. Her usually composed expression now ice-cold. A frigid storm surged in her gaze. Her voice was sharp, laced with warning. What are you trying to do? Feng Bai's smirk was cruel. I've chased after you for so long, and you've rejected me every single time. And now, you have the audacity to fall for another man? Do you have any idea how much of a laughingstock you've made me in my circle? You think you can just walk away without consequences? Su Qingsu's voice was cold, firm. If you want to make things difficult for me, I don't care, but don't you dare touch my mother. Her gaze, like shattered ice, pierced straight through him. For the first time, Feng Bai hesitated, but just as quickly, he recovered. A slow, sinister smile spread across his lips. If you don't want anything to happen to your mother, then drink all of this. Not a single drop left. On the table were dozens of high-proof liquor bottles. Every single one, a strong, burning poison. In my past life, Su Qingsu had drunk herself unconscious that night, yet Feng Bai still hadn't kept his word. He had gone to her mother's hospital anyway, but now, with her mother on the line, she couldn't afford to take that risk. Feng Bai leaned back, his grin widening. As long as you finish every bottle, I swear, I'll never bother you again. And your mother. As the strong liquor burned down her throat, Su Qingsu felt a wave of dizziness. Her body swayed slightly. Feng Bai and his lackeys jeered and cheered. Su Qingsu reached for a second bottle, but before she could grasp it, a strong hand firmly seized her wrist, and a gentle voice spoke near her ear. Drinking without inviting me? Su Qingsu blinked, dazed. She must be hallucinating. Otherwise, why would the face she had longed for, dreamed of, appear right in front of her? The young master of the wealthiest family, the embodiment of nobility and refinement. How could he possibly be in a place like this? Before she could gather her thoughts, I pulled her into my arms and asked, "Do you like me?" Su Qingsu heard her own voice, stripped of its usual coldness, laced with the warmth of intoxication. Yet, there was no hesitation in her answer. "I've liked you since high school." Then she laughed, a bright, breathtaking laugh, as if she were finally letting go of years of suppressed emotions. Hearing her answer, I lowered my head and pressed a kiss onto her lips. "As of now, you're mine. You cannot like anyone else." Su, drunk and flushed, didn't fully grasp my words, but after thinking very seriously for a moment, she leaned in and kissed me back. "I won't. My favorite person is you." From a short distance away, Feng Bai watched in disbelief. The woman who had always been cold to him, the woman who had never responded to his advances, was now kissing another man? Willingly? Something inside him snapped. His face twisted in rage. His voice rose to a hysterical shout. "Who the hell are you? How dare you steal my woman?" I gently let go of Su Qingsu, making sure she stood properly. Then lazily, I turned to Feng Bai. My gaze swept over him, indifferent, amused. And I smirked. "Who am I?